I just thought we would kind of start off right at the beginning. So obviously, my name is Blake T. You can use he, him pronouns. I'm fine with those. Those are my preferred. You are, of course, Serafin LaRiviere.
I am.
Or yes, you've been in the scene now for quite some time. I want to say, I believe I had like 20 years or so that you've been recording and writing music.
It's been my first, I think it's since 2005. What's that?
16.
16 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. 16 years. Yeah.
Yeah, 16 years.
It
So
doesn't
you're,
that
oh,
long.
well, yeah, I mean, I graduated high school in '06. So you want talking time flies, that's my entire basically adulthood was your
Oh my
career.
God.
So
I graduated well, I'm 51, so I don't know when I graduated in the 80s.
that would be, yeah.
84, 85, somewhere around
Okay,
there.
yeah. So, actually, on that note, that's kind of a great way to start off. Is you're here obviously to promote your new album Unravel, which we're all very excited about. But before we get into deep, just tell me a little bit about yourself, where you grew up,
Oh,
and
well, I was born in Vancouver, and I spent the first 8 years of my life there. And then we moved to the Kawarthas in Ontario. And I grew up, on the lake. Um, uh, Spent most of my early teenage years there. After that, I lived in my car when I was 17. Um, and after that, I lived in a chicken coop barn, which was much nicer than it sounds. And and then I made my way to Toronto, and yeah, went back to Vancouver for a few years, and was in Saskatchewan for a bit, and now based in Toronto and Quebec. So I
oh
go
wow,
between. Yeah,
yeah, I feel like I remember reading that you're based out of like the Eastern Townships in Quebec right now. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah,
yeah.
that's right. Where it is like blazingly beautiful today and super cold. And there's about 3.5 feet of snow on the ground, I think. Looks like about 3.5 feet.
We're lucky. Normally Ottawa gets a lot of snow. This is the one year that, at least for in my recent memory, that the snow has been really wonderful. And of course it's the year that we're all trapped inside.
Of course.
Of course. Law of averages.
I
So that's
know. Can you believe it's been a year? A year.
I'm
Like,
trying not to think about it too hard because I'm remembering at the beginning where it's like, oh, it's just gonna be a couple weeks. It'll just be a couple weeks, maybe a month. And then I start thinking of like that beginning stages where you got all masked up to go for your one grocery store trip. And like I don't know about you, but I was a little bit nervous because my parents are out in BC. So if anything were to happen to either of us, it was a little sketchy. But I'd go in, I'd have my list, and first things on my list were the produce, so that I had it all mapped out. So I
oh
would
yeah.
leave like in and out 10 minutes. I live alone, so I was only getting food for one person, but just in and out. And now I'm just like, what do I want to order online and wait in the lobby of my building for? And it's just gotten so complacent in it, unfortunately.
See, I admire you. You said you were only buying for one person. There's three of us in our family. I was buying for like seven because
Oh,
it was just like, what else do you do? And I was so concerned about shortages and things because in the Eastern Townships, we had no flour, we had no yeast. Meat was getting scarce. It was really weird. And then when I went back to Toronto in April, you had to line up for the hardware store, and they were rationing out masks. They'd gotten a shipment of masks in, and it's a little independent hardware store called Dudley's Hardware in the village in Toronto. And
oh,
do
I
you
know
know
of
them? Yeah,
Dudley's,
they're
yeah.
wonderful. And but these guys, they had gotten masks in, and no one else had, and they were making sure that everyone had at least two.
Mhm.
And it was like, and I said, can I have 10? Because there's three of us in our family, and one of them's a 10-year-old child. And he was like, okay, yeah, that's okay. And they really were amazing, and it brought home to me this truth that when it comes to small businesses and to people that we see every day and we form these sort of commercial relationships with, we do rely on them completely. And I thought, and I still think about the people that are working, in these conditions during a pandemic, and it's astonishing to me that they are out there doing their jobs, dealing with public, putting themselves in considerable risk. I'm just floored by that and humbled by that. It's amazing, amazing.
Oh yeah, I mean, I have a 9 to 5 as well as my work here with Hidden Beats Media, and I used to wake up every morning, go to the Starbucks that was like halfway between my apartment and the office, and I had a
Right.
whole routine. But when it switched over, I realized I don't have to go to Starbucks. I live in kind of a student neighborhood here in Ottawa. So I was
Mhm.
like, there are tons of little mom and pop shops, and I've always gone to mom and pop places for food. So I just became one-on-one names with
Yeah.
everywhere.
And these people saved us, right? These are the
Oh
people that
yeah.
actually assessed it situation by situation. I watched the guys at the hardware store. A woman couldn't afford in the past like $5. And he's like, "We're selling these at cost," and he's like, "Pay me later."
Oh yeah.
These people save us. It's amazing.
The return of the bartering system and the return of trust has been
Yeah.
a really fascinating aspect of COVID, because on the one hand, interpersonal dynamics with small businesses, there has been a lot more trust. The trust in
Mhm.
your coworkers, trust in your clientele, especially like return clientele. But then at the same time, my lack of trust in the general society has
Oh,
dropped moderately
my sister,
considerably.
who is a very wise woman, she said to me, I have seen that we are way better than I thought we were and way worse than I thought we were
Oh,
as a people.
100%.
And I thought that was so succinct of her to sum it up that way. Um, and we see this sort of attitude where it's like either we're all in the same boat or it's every person for themselves. And I'm just thrilled that I can see we're in the same boat people that I didn't identify as easily early on, didn't pay tribute to personally early on. So it's nice to be able to see that.
Well, and I mean, and I'm interested in this as an artist. You deal with a lot of people in various levels of intimacy, because all friendships are levels of intimacy, and I think that we need to start rebranding those relationships with better terminology. But that's asides the point. And I'm just curious if you had kind of a shift in balance between folks that you were just more kind of acquaintances with and who maybe have reached out more, you've reached out to, and made you sort of reevaluate everyone in your life, really.
For sure. The best, most powerful example of that was in recording Unravel. I had originally planned to go in the studio in Quebec City, where I have a lot of gigs in Quebec City because I'm near there and I have an agent there, and my record label is there. And so I had planned to record at the university in the recording studio as a full recording studio. And, I was going to work with Clément, who is on my album and who I've been working with in Quebec for gigs. And when COVID hit, all of that was set aside because we couldn't do anything. And the album changed dramatically. I was actually in this room for hours, sort of arranging music and realizing that I wanted to write more music than I had originally planned. But when it came to record the music, I went back to Toronto and I went to the musicians that I have known for 16 years, literally every one of them for 16 years, except Clément, who played piano, who came in from Quebec. And we all bubbled together in the studio. And the studio was number 9 studio in Toronto, which is a fantastic place to record. It's an old Edwardian house. It's in Cabbagetown. It's just the best vibe, and it's state of the art inside. And they had the separate booths that we were able to go into so we could be protected. But we decided to bubble together for 8 days. And I trusted those guys completely. I never even hesitated because I knew that they would take care of themselves and each other and all of us. I'll get emotional, I think about it. And so we had this 8-day period where I was just with them. I didn't see anybody else. Clement was staying with me at my home in Toronto. And it created this feeling. I've always loved recording, but it created this feeling of return and newness, because it was like I was returning to the guys that I've always recorded with, but also we were creating something new. And I would have been shy normally about playing the songs I had written, or showing them the arrangements I had created for some of the jazz songs that weren't really jazz arrangements. And I didn't feel that. For some reason, I didn't feel sort of shy about sharing that with them. It's easier to share that kind of new stuff with strangers almost. And they just seized it and they went for it. And I don't know, it was magical. But yes, it was, I realized that, these guys that I love and I've been working with for so long, they're irreplaceable. They
Mm.
just are.
That's powerful, that feeling. And
Oh yeah.
you know,
I would, you know, we're a very verbal vocal group. And, I would be in the control room yelling my head off. Like George Kohler did this solo for I Put a Spell on You on the bass, the upright bass, but he did it with a bow, like a cello would. And I don't know if you've heard an upright bass being bowed. It's the most gut-inducing, sort of wonderful, warm, deep sound you can imagine, like a cello, but an octave lower. And he just went nuts. He did it in one take, and it is like an Eddie Van Halen guitar solo on a bass with a bow. It's insane. And I found that that was happening a lot in the studio, where people were just sort of throwing expectancy to the wind. And I was hollering and yelling, and we were cheering and hugging, and it was just because none of us had seen anybody else.
yeah.
So yeah, it was a powerful experience. I will never ever lose sight of that experience.
That's really fascinating. I mean, there's a lot to touch on there, but I really like that you mentioned, it was a slightly outside of your usual jazz styling. And
Yeah,
I freely admit I am not the foremost knowledge on jazz and the jazz community as a whole, but I have noticed that as I get older, I notice there's a lot more jazz undercurrent to the music that the average person listens to, or at least that the average person is aware of. And I was
yeah.
just kind of curious, being in the scene for so long, how have you noticed it change over the years? And just in the sense of, a lot more newer artists experimenting with a little bit more of a jazz sound.
I think that's becoming much more prevalent. When I first started, my first album was pop songs done as jazz songs. And, my second album was just a mixture of things. And my third album was jazz, and was mostly just jazz. And what I've noticed, when I first started, I had, the jazz, they call them the jazz police in Toronto. So, and they're really bold. They tend to be older white gentlemen, and they would come up and tell me that what I was doing wasn't jazz. One guy told me it was an insult to jazz. And it was really harsh, really, really harsh. And that was when I first started out. And my manager at the time, who produced the album, is still one of my dearest friends, James B. He was like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. And that that sort of part of the jazz community seems to have receded. And now we have artists like Lila Bialy and Elizabeth Shepard and Brandy Disterheft, who are taking what jazz is supposed to be and just breaking it or changing it or morphing it into something else. And I was really inspired by that. Plus, with COVID, I was like, why am I following rules that I don't necessarily need to follow? I don't need to impress anybody. And and the songs still have jazz. The song that has been doing well on YouTube and on radio has been "Take on Me." It's a cover I did of a 1980s pop tune, disco pop tune that I remember the first time around, and oh, and and it's not a jazz tune at all, but I still did back phrasing with the singing. I still sang behind the beat, which is a jazz sort of technique. So I think that's happening a lot more with music. And I think we saw it with, Jennifer Warnes was playing with that in the 90s. And what's that? George Harrison's daughter. Um, oh, I'm blanking on her name. Don't know why. Nora Jones. Nora
Yeah.
Jones was heavily infusing jazz into her pop music, and I thought,
Oh, for sure.
yeah, and I just thought, and I was actually influenced by an album that I grew up with, Alita Adams' first album, which was Circle of One. She had that song, you can reach me by railway, the Come Home, Get Here song, and that album, which I've loved for most of my adult years, when I listen to it now, I think, oh, it's jazz too. It's pop and jazz. So, yeah, I get that's a long way around your answer. I'm sorry.
Oh gosh, no, like and I was even going to build upon that. You have artists like Paro Stellar that are blending experimental electronics, the only way I can think to explain their
Yeah,
sound, with jazz. You have artists like Puddles, the Unhappy Clown, or whatever his
oh,
name
I
is.
love Puddles.
And it's just funny that we're talking about, the cover of Aha's Take on Me, CCR's I've Put a Spell on You is another
Yeah,
one that you do. And it's just interesting how newer generations are taking, I mean, Puddles is, I think, like 30 something, maybe 40 something, but it went viral, and using social media to kind of promote this very old school style of music for a newer generation of
yeah,
audiences.
yeah.
And even you were mentioning the upright bass being played as a cello. I think of artists like the Arcade Fire, who
Oh,
have brought
yes. Yeah,
in all these large style band elements that are coming from that jazz, I want to say like late 30s kind
yeah,
of big band sound, and bringing it to the forefront of contemporary pop music. I mean, like you mentioned, Nora Jones broke down many barriers. that
oh,
that
yeah.
she was the first I could think of, was like jazz that I listened to that wasn't at like some music festival in Montreal, you know what I mean?
Yes, yes. And the interesting thing for me is that the people that have been breaking down these barriers, I mean, there's amazing male artists in Canada and the United States. There's Matt Dusk, who's insanely gifted.
Mm,
And,
we've worked with Matt
Big
Dusk.
Ray, sorry?
We worked with Matt Dusk as well.
Ah, I love Matt Dusk.
Yeah.
Big Jake, who's like jump up jive, jump up jazz. And but they're fabulous. But the ones that I've noticed really sort of stretching things ahead are the women in jazz: Elizabeth Shepard, Lila Bialy, Brandy Disterhaft. Um, it's those people. Michael Casehammer is another person who's been
Yeah.
sort of deconstructing jazz, and I look at that and I think it is so far removed from the older sort of baby boomer generation white guys, and God love them. They're it's fabulous, but no one group should be in control of a music industry. And for the longest time, they were in control of the music industry when it came to jazz music, and they're not anymore. And I think we're seeing that loosening of restrictions. I really do.
Yeah, I mean, when you were discussing your previous issues about like the blues club and the older white men gatekeeping
The jazz
jazz,
piece,
and
yeah.
I was just, all I could think of was the irony of a bunch of old cranky white men gatekeeping a predominantly black led and black created musical genre. The irony is not lost there.
Oh, and I mean the creativity that went into this music, like jazz was about everything. There were, Nina Simone, who was, blues, she
Oh,
was a bit of everything. But Nina Simone trained as a classical pianist, and she brought that to her arrangements and to her playing. And, so jazz isn't just fixed in one place. Like, okay, Thelonious did this and Miles Davis does this, and we're not going to move any further beyond that. When in reality, jazz was in flux back then. It moved all over the place. It went to Bing Crosby, and popular music was sort of smooth jazz, and it went to experimental places. And I think that that's happening more as younger artists and female artists and artists of color are having, they're making room for themselves And, I kind of wiggled in wherever I could. And I'm, I really feel like a sense of community around me, in particular in the Toronto jazz scene. But it's hard to break in, when you're, or it was hard to break in, and I don't think it is as much now.
No, it's I work a lot with Canadian country musicians, just kind
Nice.
of predominantly how things fall. And that's something I've always remarked with a lot of our female artists is that while the men are just throwing anything at a wall that sticks and branching out any way that they can, the women have finally kind of taken their rightful place. I mean, you've always had your powerhouses, Dolly Parton, etc., down to, I mean, they're the chicks now. They used to be the Dixie Chicks, but the storytelling and narratives that are being played out in female-led country musicians is just so much. What's that? I want to use the word guttural. Like it's just so strong because it's
Yeah.
finally taking their place.
Visceral. Yeah.
Visceral, thank you. That was the
Yeah.
word I was looking for. Because they're finally taking their place alongside their peers. And they're not just being pigeon-toed into this cutesy role. It's like, no, I am going to create something emotional. You are going to feel something from it. Hear me
Yeah.
roar. And I really love that about what, as we were mentioning, what a lot of the younger folks are doing with musical sounds nowadays.
And then we see people, the established sort of scene, the established players, Billy Ray Cyrus, who his daughter was like, there's this guy and he's singing country and he's black and he does a little bit of rap and stuff, and he's not getting it. And Billy Ray Cyrus is like, yeah, I'm in, and so you see these people that are true visionaries and truly solid in their own art, making sure that there's space for new stuff. And that's what I think in Canada in particular, that is the norm. I think that we see that happening in country and in jazz and in pop, where we see other people sort of paying tribute. David Clayton Thomas is a huge supporter from Blood, Sweat and Tears. Who's very active still. He is a huge supporter of young talent. Very inclusive. And I think that we're seeing more and more of that from people that have been around a long, long time, and they are excited by the change. I think that's really cool. I think it's the majority, truly.
I'm wondering then, just building off that topic, if it's because Canada doesn't have such established scenes, in the sense that, say, in the States, you have places like Nashville, which are known for their country. And that's, if you want to become a country musician, you have to go through Nashville and every step that goes on down there. Lord knows I don't know everything. But it's interesting that Canada doesn't have those scenes because you're slightly based out of Toronto, which is also known for its hip hop scene as much
Yeah,
as it is for jazz, which is as much as it is for pop music. A lot
yeah.
of the labels are out there, so country music comes out of there. I'm wondering if it's because we have this decentralized sense of self in Canada versus the kind of pocket communities that they do down in the States.
I think we're not as tribal, and I think that's probably part of our personality, because I think Canadians are curious. I think by nature Canadians are very curious. I think a lot of it is population density. We're what, 30 million people, and so we're much more spread apart. We have to include other people. We can't just sort of segregate in our own little pockets, in our own little bubbles. And clubs can't survive just booking one kind of club or one kind of music. So you do get this, so you get regulars that are exposed to a little bit of jazz or a little bit of country, a little bit of bluegrass, a little bit of rock and roll. And yeah, I think Canada is unique in that. I think our curiosity, I think we're a curious people. Not
Yeah.
curious like odd. Well, actually, no, curious. I think we're inquisitive.
Well, just on that topic, what was your first big exposure then to jazz? What made you decide to go out with this as a venue and a route in life?
I had been singing. I started out doing musical theater, and I really loved it. I loved the live performance of it, and I did well singing. But my acting is truly like it's Hervé Villechaize level of terrible. Like it's just awful. It's just awful. oh, look, there is a train coming. It was terrible. Um, and so that kind of moved into, I was singing some pop music, then I was just sort of in between, and then I did a sort of electronic album um, in Vancouver. And then I was sort of floating along and I was finding myself listening to a lot of classic music, a lot of the American Songbook, which is, you know, Rosemary Clooney and Bing Crosby and, you know, Nat King Cole and loving that music. And then I bought, of all things, a Cyndi Lauper album called At Last. And I loved it. I thought it was a great album. And then shortly after that, I met James B. I was a journalist at the time. I was a journalist for 10 years and for a print magazine called Extra. And I was covering the Pantages condominium opening right across from Massey Hall. And James was there, and I was there with Enza Anderson. And we were chatting, and he knew Enza, and he came over and started chatting, and he said, oh, I've never met a Serafin before. He said, but I know a Serafina. And so we got chatting, and he said, you know, it's my birthday tomorrow night. Come and sing. And so I went, and it turned out that Bravo was doing a piece on on James, and that they were there filming. So I got up and I didn't know anything except I thought, oh, I'll do It Last, because I've been listening to this album, and I knew it was in G. And so, and it was with most of the musicians that I've been working with ever since. And it was great. The people were hooting and hollering and standing up, and it was, you know, filmed, and James took it to Ralph Ben-Mergy, who was the morning drive DJ on Jazz FM at the time, and he was like, I want this. He was, I don't know if it's a her or him, I want them in. And so James said, do you want to make an album? And I said, yeah, I really do. And we chose songs and chose musicians and chose arrangements and did the album, and that was the start. That was it.
So intriguingly enough, you ended up having a Bravo documentary made about you several years later, or was this in
a Bravo
conjunction?
fact? Yeah, it was a Bravo fact. And I keep trying to get copies of it, and I don't know how to. But it played for over 2 years. It was just a little short. It was about 7 minutes long, I think. And it was the things that Bravo used to insert between their longer programming. And I never saw it. Like, I know these people telling me about it, and I never saw it. Somebody took a photograph of it, of me on the thing, because I was in disbelief. But yeah, so it ran through 2005 and 2006, through those 2 years, and I never saw it. And the guy Jan Karastamatis, who profiled me for the National Post, he had seen it. So he was describing it to me.
Well, if it was airing,
I don't really know what I looked like. I was heavier then, and I was still sorting my hair out, and you know.
That's so. What was intriguing was, I want to get back to your work with Extra in just a moment, but if it was airing on Bravo between 05, 06, there's a very strong chance that I have seen it, because that would have been like my grade 12 year, my final year of high school. So I would have been watching Queer as Folk at the time. And they probably played either right before or right after. So it's very strong chance. Yeah.
Yeah. They played a thing of me singing At Last. And then they did My Funny Valentine, which was the single we released. They just showed short portions of it, and then they interviewed me in between. And yeah, I really wish I could. I get uncomfortable seeing myself singing, because you know, when you sing, you ain't pretty. Like I interviewed, when I was working for Extra, I interviewed Patti LaBelle, and we were singing together. We sang Under the Rainbow. We were just chatting. We got along really well. She gave me her mashed potato recipe, which is like a pound of butter. And I asked her about singing on stage, and I said, God, you look amazing. She had some work done shortly prior to this little publicity thing she was doing, and she was looking really good. And she said, oh, honey, she said, I keep it together. She said, you know, when the down in the scrum, like the photo, where the photographers and the videographers are at the foot of the stage, you know, they're allowed to be there for the first song. And she said, I can keep it together for the first 5 minutes, but after all that, it's hair and sweat and saliva and smeared, and, you know, all bets are off. And I just thought, damn, you know, that's really cool. So, you know, and I know when I sing, it's all hair and sweat.
Oh, if it's any consolation, listening back to the audio recording, I am not a singer by any means, shape, or form, but just hearing my own voice as routinely as I have to, it's just, oh, that's
Oh, right, of course.
why are
Yeah,
people friends with me? This is terrible.
I'm partially deaf in this ear. So I have been singing like this. This is called deer's ears. It's a vocal
Mm.
thing you can do. And you put your hand behind your ear and you can hear the sound rather than coming through your skull, which gets muffled and warmed up. You hear the sound traveling across the planes of your cheek. And you hear what you actually sound like. So I wasn't surprised when I heard my voice. And I'm a bit of a, you know, I'm a bit of a narcissist. I listen to my albums, quite enjoy them. So, but you know, I heard Madonna does too, so I'm in good company.
Oh, wow. It's good enough for the queen. It is good enough for us.
Exactly.
So you started working with Extra quite some time ago. So I know I started seeing headlines, I want to say in 2008, 2010.
Oh, earlier, earlier.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then I mean, I started off doing small pieces and then I started doing really long pieces. I was really good at interviewing people. I was terrible at theater reviews. So I tried those at first, but I was horrible because they give you cookies, right? And what am I going to do? Like, give me this warm, soft chocolate chip cookie. I love the show. so, so I got taken off that. My editor at the time, who was just returned to Extra this last year, Gordon Bonus, I had no training. And he said, write me something, send it in. I did. And he mentored me, as he
Wow.
has many other writers. And I ended up writing for them for over 10 years. And I did a lot of interviews. I got to interview Patti LaBelle and Hugh Jackman and Kathleen Turner and Kim Cattrall and all sorts of people. I interviewed Margaret Cho right before going to a funeral.
Wait, were you on your way to a funeral or was she?
I was on my way to a funeral, but she was
Oh,
very
okay.
funereal. She was in a very sort of bad mood that day and really, you know, very monosyllabic. And after I talked to her, I found out that she had done like 15 interviews that day, and it was only 11 o'clock. And I
Oh,
thought, oh my God, I can't even believe she even spoke. Like, can you imagine? Oh,
that explains the monosyllabism. Yeah.
yes,
Well,
exactly.
speaking of your pieces with Extra, I noticed there were a lot of kind of long form, I guess,
Yeah.
long form essay styles. And those were the ones that I really resonated with, which kind of leads into, Unravel, your latest album, comes after a 10-year hiatus from music and recording,
Mhm.
at least, because of the adoption of your son.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, your
Yeah.
adoption of your child. I always feel awkward putting
No, it's
gender
my
labels
son.
on
Yeah.
children.
No, yeah, I mean, I was still singing. I was still singing in Toronto. We were in San Francisco for a year. I was singing there. Did not sing at all in Saskatchewan because there ain't nowhere to sing jazz in Saskatchewan. And so um, I wasn't recording, and I had been planning to record something because the album that I had done just prior to our adoption was the only one I'd ever cracked the States with. It was called Love's Worst Crime, and I had one original that I'd written called I Didn't Love New York, and then my version of Don't Explain. Those were getting airplay in community radio in the States. And then our child arrived, and yeah, like, I don't know. You see those people that have children and then they just go back to work, and it's like, and they like write a cookbook and macrame an addition for their house, and looms and things. I can't imagine doing any of those things. I only had one. He was a year old, and it just sort of, it was everything, and it was wonderful and challenging and difficult and delightful and all sorts of things. And it didn't leave a lot of space for me to do I was still writing for extra, but it didn't leave me a lot of space to do much of anything else other than just gigs. I was doing gigs in Quebec and in Quebec City, and yeah. And then he's gotten older. He's 10 and a half. And, I can go off for a week or 5 days and the world doesn't fall apart, or I can bring him with me.
Mm.
Um, and it's okay. It's easier. And when COVID hit, I wanted to do something for the 10th year anniversary because it's been 10 years. Um, but I found myself writing, as I wrote the arrangements, I found myself writing about being a parent, but it wasn't songs like, "Oh, I'm a parent now, look how hard it is and how," it was not that kind of stuff. It was, you know, I wrote a song, the next single is called Mom, and I wrote it because I was upstairs, I was homeschooling, which is like the complete crap show you could ever imagine. I was not built for homeschooling. And, my son was frustrated and I was frustrated and I felt like I was failing and I felt terrible. And I came downstairs and I wanted to call this woman that had been my sort of surrogate mom since I was homeless, since I was 17. And she had passed away a month and a half before. And I felt this deep sense of loss. I was just bereft because I needed her advice. I was constantly bugging her for advice because she had raised two daughters of her own. And so I wrote this song called Mom. And it was funny because I played it for somebody early on. He's in the, "Oh, who's that about? Like, was it a bad relationship?" And I said, "No, it's about my son," because the line is, "I yelled and he's gone." Like, as I yelled at him. I hadn't really yelled. I kind of raised, singers don't yell. I raised my voice and he was upset and he took it. And I was like, I wanted to write about that sense of loss. And so I wrote it. And it's not a happy song. It's just a song about grief. And that led me into writing Good Boy, which is a song about how wonderful. And I remember Jamie Lee Curtis in an interview many decades ago said that her children were great because they were generous and kind and complicated. And that complicated was the best thing a person could be. And I thought, oh, I love that. And I thought, he is complicated. We
I was
all
gonna
are.
say that is beautiful. Yeah. Like,
I know. I should see it's probably 30 years since she said it. I could just have said I made it up, but I didn't. It was Jamie Lee Curtis. Thanks, Jamie. And yeah, it led me into a lot of writing about, and Unravel was, of course, about being unable to touch people and see people. And yeah, it really did. Writing sort of about your life really is powerful and cathartic, and doesn't have to be literal. It's
mm. I mean, there was a lot of emotional baggage there to unpack, and I just kind of want to go through it a little bit more. You had mentioned right after the adoption, the idea of going back to work just not being even an option on the table. I'm curious, COVID has really shown us, or especially over the last year, and highlighted the unfortunate um, amount of invisible labor that single parents or stay-at-home parents go through. And it's really pushed the ideology of, there needs to be a lot more equality, or equity, I should say, within homes. And I'm just curious if you, having been a little bit more at home and not, a standard 9 to 5 worker,
yeah.
if you experienced that when you became a parent.
Oh yeah. I remember I had an assignment I was writing. I was writing a lot for extra, and I had an assignment due, and my son had just learned to walk, and I hadn't been able to. You can never completely baby proof a house, you know, and he was just everywhere. I thought, there's no way I can do this. And we were actually fostering at first for the first 9 months because as an LGBT couple, it is more difficult to adopt a child from a foster family because they have a say in who the child goes to, yet they don't have to follow any guidelines set down by the government of Regina and the government of Canada. the government of Saskatchewan and the government of Canada. And they were great. The bureaucracy, I can't speak today, that we dealt with were amazingly supportive. And they were very blunt. They were like, you'll have a better shot at this if you foster a child first. So not only was I at home trying to work and having this kid with me, I also had this thing where I was, falling in love with this child and realizing that he could be taken away.
Mm.
And, I call those the potato chip months because, you know, that's pretty much what got me through. And when his adoption certificate arrived, it was on my birthday on June 7th. And it was this massive relief because I realized I didn't have to worry anymore. Because when I had him, it was either leave him at home with my partner and go sing somewhere because I couldn't take him out of the province because we were fostering at that point and you can't just take him out of the province. So it was, and it just sort of grew from there where I loved being home with him. He went to daycare and then he went to kindergarten and all that kind of stuff. And I loved it. I loved being, there with him in the afternoons, there with him in the evenings, there with him in the mornings. And it just nothing else seemed sort of important enough to take me away from that.
Mm.
Yeah, it was, yeah, you really fall, I think it was Michael Douglas that said that you fall in love with your kids. No one tells you that you just adore them. You just, that's why you don't mind changing their diapers. That's why you don't mind it when they barf on you, which my son did in my mouth. That's why you don't mind these things because you just adore them with all of your heart. You love them with all of your heart. And it became that. And I couldn't imagine anything that might, if I had to tour or something, I couldn't even imagine it. No.
Yeah, I'm at the age now where most of the people I went to high school with and university with have children, whether
Mm.
they're small children, like that they're still experiencing those fun toddlers. So I know what you mean by you can't fully baby proof anything. Or they're in those like beginning primary age years at school, so around the same age your son is, and it's wildly fascinating for me to watch. And like, don't get me wrong, I'm completely happy for them, but as a gay man, what you touched on, I'm slowly starting to realize that as a single gay man, the likelihood of me being able to adopt a child is quite low and very difficult, and it's been very sobering to
Mm.
realize like, oh, I might not have a family and just to come to terms with that. So I love how very vocal you are about that because it's an unfortunate reality, and it's even more unfortunate how many people don't realize that it's our reality.
Yeah. I remember when we couldn't adopt, and then they were making provisions for LGBT couples to adopt AIDS babies, you know,
Mm,
children, babies that were born with AIDS. That was it. And as it changed over time, I thought, do I want a family? Do I not want a family? I had a tricky upbringing. I wasn't sure. Um, but then it just dawned on me that um, I really wanted to, I liked being around kids and but also, in the LGBT community, you have to be careful how you're around children. And that's the truth that not a lot of people want to talk about, but there's always this thing where you have to remember the optics of everything, you're always a little bit on guard because gays and lesbians and trans folk and bisexual folk over the years have been demonized, as being pedophiles, as being inappropriate, as being all these sort of things. And to have that gone in my lifetime is a miracle. Um, and also to know that there are different avenues, yourself as a single gay man, you can foster a kid to adopt a slightly older child, or you can adopt a slightly older kid and have a lot of input, what you're prepared to deal with, what you're not prepared to deal with, um, that kind of stuff. There are a lot of different avenues to parenthood. The one avenue I wouldn't recommend is we were co-parenting for a short time and we had no rights. And that relationship fell apart with the parents of that child. And so we never saw the kid again.
Oh,
And I have cautioned, a lot of people say, oh, we're going to co-parent a child, or oh, we're very involved in this kid's life. And one of the things that I think we are at risk for is that we don't have rights when it comes to kids that we co-parent or kids that we look after, we take part in their upbringing. Um, I've cautioned a lot of people about that, which is probably not a very popular thing to say, but it's brutal.
no, but
It's brutal.
it is a reality. And
Mhm.
there's only so many, I'm trying to think how to phrase this. There's only so much icing you can put on a rotten cake to
Yeah.
make it edible. Like you just some things you have to be more honest and truthful about it. And
Yeah.
I think it's, as members of like the queer community, we have the option of having a chosen family,
Yeah.
but those people are also free to leave our lives.
Yeah.
And we talk, in society in general, we talk about death and loss of a loved one, a parent, siblings, etc. But we don't talk about the loss of friendships.
Yeah.
And you had spoken about a woman who was a kind of mother figure in your life, and that
Yeah.
loss. And while yes, not technically a mother, that was a mothering influence to you. So
Oh, yeah.
it
She was my mom. I called her mom.
okay, I didn't want to go to, I didn't know you the
No,
depths of
no,
the
no, don't worry
relationship.
about it.
So yeah.
No, I have full disclosure syndrome, so whatever.
Okay,
But
perfect. Yeah.
you're absolutely right. We don't acknowledge the loss of friendships. I've had friends become, my best friend became very, very staunchly Roman Catholic and ended a 25-year friendship. And the parent, we helped raise that other child for 4 years. And that just was gone, but the gift from that was that I thought, oh, I can be a parent. I can do this. I
Mm.
can do this. And so it gave me that gift of knowing I could be a parent. But we don't have that kind of control. And I think a lot of people, it's so easy to say, oh, well, they can marry, they can adopt, it's all fine. Well, yeah, it's great. Um, but we we still have very much fewer tributaries when it comes to traveling the river of life. Oh, that
Yeah.
was poetic. I like that.
Yeah, that was, it was beautiful. So speaking also just on the parenthood train, we live in a very social media heavy, shall we say,
Mhm.
world. Do you find it difficult seeing, the parents that are constantly posting about their children online versus the privacy and the consent of your child to be posted online? Have you found difficulties with that, or like at least within your own circles?
I don't post anything.
Mm,
I don't use Facebook except for work. If I want to contact somebody or I follow things, for entertainment, I'll follow it. I don't post anything about my son. I don't post, I did a quick little video for Good Boy, and it has a video of my son from earlier years, but I never show his face.
mm,
And that is simply because I don't want to take away his agency over how he wants himself seen. But also, I'm acutely aware that my son is non-white, and so I'm acutely aware of racism and homophobia and all those sort of phobias. We've certainly experienced some of that, um, and it was not fun. And we've had to explain to our son, what, some people don't like people that have different shades of skin. Some people don't like people that aren't, husband and wife. Some people are just like that. And he's become quite a little activist about it. And but he doesn't have social media. We don't. Um, he just recently got. We let him play Minecraft. It's like Saturday and Sunday, 2.5 hours each day, and that's it. And there's no social media stuff, so we're really lucky that way. And then the village that we're in is called North Hatley. It's very, very, very small village. It's like 500 people for most of the year. And then in the summertime, it goes up to like 4,000. And with people with summer homes and cottages, but most of the year we're quite quiet here. And his school only has a small number of children in it, and so it's pretty protected in lots of ways. We've had a couple of run-ins, but mostly the social media thing, I think that kids need to be kept, just my opinion, my kid needs to be kept away from it. Um, some of his friends have cell phones, but not most. So I think social media is pretty toxic. I'm not a Meghan Markle fan, but oh boy, I watched that interview last night and I was like, yeah, I hear ya. You know?